Hello, and welcome to the second lecture on maritime security promoted by the Japan House São Paulo and the School of International Relations at Fundação Getulio Vargas. This event is complementary to the last week's lecture on the law of the sea in East Asia, so we are now bringing the discussions to the South Atlantic with a lecture by Professor Dr. André Beirão and comments from Professor Dr. Kentaro Nishimoto, joining us again from Japan. The main goal of the event is to promote debates between Japanese and Brazilian scholars, while also making them open and of free access to the public. Once again, I remind you that all statements expressed during the event represent only personal opinions and not necessarily the institutional position of Fundação Getulio Vargas, and all present here have agreed to participate and have consented to be recorded in this broadcast. I now invite Mr. Carlos Rosa, Vice President of the Japan House São Paulo, to please join us in the opening remarks.
Hi, Luana. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Well, good evening, everybody. Good morning for Professor Kentaro in Japan. It's a pleasure for Japan House São Paulo to be here with you. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Fundação Getulio Vargas and Professors Pedro and Luana for the invitation. To thank you also the Professor Kentaro Nishimoto and Professor André Beirão for the participation in this event. And just to give you a few words, Japan House is a institution from the Japanese government, and we have as mostly objective to present the Japan of this century to the South American, to the Latin American population. We are physically at the Avenida Paulista in São Paulo, but we are also very present on the digital environment. Since we opened it 5 years ago, we had the privilege to receive more than 2.2 million of visitors, and last year, more than 7 million persons access our contents in the digital environment. We work very closely to the Japanese government, to people from the Japanese consulate, which will also thank you for the opportunity. And I'd like to invite you to visit us once you have the opportunity. We are in São Paulo, and also, if you're not here, you can follow us on our digital environment. Thank you very much again for the opportunity, and I hope you have a very interesting webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa. I stress that the audience is encouraged to participate by sending questions during the entire event through the Slido platform. To submit your questions, you just have to follow the link at the event description on YouTube. Tonight, we are swapping roles, and the main lecture will be given by Professor André Beirão from the postgraduate program in Maritime Studies at the Naval War College in Brazil. He is a Doctor of Law from the State University of Rio de Janeiro and received his master's degrees from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and also from the Naval War College. He is a former deputy coordinator of CAPES, a Brazilian federal government agency responsible for evaluating higher education courses in Brazil. He is currently a researcher at the Center for Political Strategic Studies at the Naval War College and represents one of the main exponents of naval studies in Brazil, having organized and authored multiple publications in the field. Professor Beirão, thank you very much for your kind collaboration, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Luana, for this kindly beginning. I'm not so much as you said, but thank you. And I'd like to thank you also the invitation and the opportunity from Fundação Getulio Vargas promoting this event, from Japan House. Thank you so much for your words, Professor Rosa, and it's a pleasure to be here again, a week after we had the opportunity to see a Japanese perspective in a Japanese legal perspective of the main subjects in maritime security in the East Asia. I know East Asia is not so easy to locate, but Professor Kentaro talked to us in a very clear manner, and thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And today I will try to share with you a southern perspective of maritime security. And I begin with this slide with, as you have done last week, showing us a different map, a different perspective from the map, not north-south, but east-west. And here I'm trying to show you another different perspective from the globe. Here, the center is in Brasilia, our capital. So for us in Brazil, the world is like this. It's not the Europe in center or the North America in center, and including the south. Almost in all maps we can see them smaller and far from the heart of the world, and I think Japan feels something similar with that. It's always in the end of the maps. So I will try to share with you some kind of what do we here in South Atlantic feel about maritime security. First of all, it's not so easy for us to understand the definition, the concept of maritime security. Is not an easy way to do that. So I used to share with my students a typological approach from the concept in 3 different ways of seeing the concept of maritime security, and a complex one, a convergent one, and a divergent one. It seems the opposite, the convergent and the divergent, but I will try to explain why I use this typological approach. Why is a complex concept? Because we have a lot of different machines working, all of them together, but with different sizes and importance around the world. We have the universal trends in the sea, we have regional perspectives, and now I will talk to you with this kind of regional perspective, but we have national interests and big countries, mainly, as we can see here in Brazil, or in Africa, we can see it in Namibia or in Angola, the big countries, or in Nigeria. We have different perspectives from the south to north, from the east to west. So we have different internal institutional thinking, different perspectives from maritime security. If you have a Coast Guard, you think in one way. If you have if you are in a Navy, you are in another way. If you are in police stations, you think in a different way. What is the threats you have to face? Why is a convergent concept? Because if you see the heart of the maritime security, you have big issues, big subjects talking, oh, we have to think about the sea. The universal peace, so you have to have a peaceful sea, peaceful waters. You have some kinds of difficult concepts as good order at sea, some kinds of interests, mainly for big countries to keep the freedom of navigations. Small countries always think, well, I prefer to have a small sea, but I can take care of this small sea than the freedom of navigation of all the seas, because I don't have maritime power to be all around the world. You have the maritime safety, and we have some kinds of threats in a difficult way to keep away from maritime security. Some kinds of threats, you have security problems and safety problems. And specific one problem as sustainable use of the sea is an exploitation of resources. So you come from big problems, big perspective, to small and specific one. All of them faced to maritime security. And why I say it's divergent, because if you see the hard point, the 0, 0 of this graphic is the main problem. I don't have doubts. This is maritime security threat. When you go far from the center, you are in, yes, it's a maritime security threat, but not so much. But some threats you have to see in different perspective. And here I use this graphic. First of thinking of this is Professor Christian Bulger, and sharing with him some different perspectives. I use this graphic in a different way. We have 4 plans to think: national security, environment, economic of the sea, and the human security. And in this map, you can see, well, all of these threats are maritime security problems: drugs theft, weapon theft, human theft, putting inside human theft, migration, modern slavery, interstate conflict, the typical war, maritime boundaries problems, terrorism, piracy, smuggling, resources, marine pollution, climate change. But the question is, where are all these threats, and how big is each one of these threats to each country or region? That's why this was my main question of a research that I will share with you in a South Atlantic perspective. What are the challenges and possibilities of growing the maritime security? Well, first of all, South Atlantic is a different place, because we have a social-cultural perspective so different. All of them were colonies, most of them from European countries, poor countries. The relevance of our maritime traffic is not so big as the northern part. We have some kinds of developing stages near one from the other, and all of them under the northern of the planet. And if you see in a geopolitical perspective, for example, in military expenses, you can see this map. So it's difficult to even to locate Africa in this map because they have so teeny amount of money to put in military expenses. So you can see here clearly, if we see Ecuador is here, look, not in the middle of the map, it's here. Ecuador passes here. So the northern part has to be in this kind of map bigger than southern, because it was not possible to put it in the same perspective. A social, economic, and cultural perspective, if you are yellow, red, and pink, you are in the poor countries. And if you are in the blue or dark blue, you are in an economic and cultural developed country. If you look to the south, mainly in South Atlantic, you look clearly, we are in a different region. Well, looking from the complex approach, you can see the universal trends are different in South Atlantic. Just for an example, in white lines here, you have a picture of the maritime traffic. And if you see in the northern part of this map, in the northern part of this map, you have like a corridor problem from east to west, But in South Atlantic, we don't have a corridor from east to west, and it's much easier to think about maritime security if you think, well, you live from this side and you have to arrive at this side. But in South Atlantic, you have as a cross problem. You have a lot of traffic from the south of Africa to America, from the South America to Europe, from America to Africa. So it's we have less maritime traffic, but much more difficult to be controlled than in the northern part of the globe. Well, in the divergent approach, that graphic, to see, well, what are the main threats in South Atlantic? To do this research, I would have to face two different perspectives. What are the global interests and what are the South Atlantic interests? To do this, I use the methodology of probability of occurrence crossing with a rising impacts. And we have one side, the global interest, what the main agenda, the main organization, international organization thinking about the threats in maritime security. And we have 24 or 25 countries in South Atlantic that are part of ZOPACAS, what they think about. And to face one perspective to other one, for the first one, I mainly used what are the main speeches, documents from the main organizations thinking about the sea, from United Nations and from IMO, in all of those threats I have shown: piracy, human security, human traffic, weapon. And if you put this in that methodology, you will see this graphic. So you will see that piracy are the main subject faced in a lot of documents from IMO, from United Nations, and terrorism is another problem, but typical wars from states are far from the center, mainly in national security problems. Marine pollution is far, but piracy, there's no doubts, are near the maritime security. So if you see this map, I had to face them with the other ones. So in this research, I had the opportunity of having from the 25 countries of ZOPACAS, 17 stakeholders, chief of navies or ministry of seas, together here in Rio in 2018. And I had the opportunity to ask each one separately 3 different questions. Which of the following topics, all of them piracy, smuggling, are the most worrying in terms of maritime security in your area? And I asked them to sort from the most relevant to least relevant. Observing the chosen, assign the percentage of financial commitments you use in these threats. And the third one, what you think ideally could be the right percentage of financial commitments. And doing this, I had this big picture that I could concentrate in just one graphic. And as you see in the italic bold here, look, intra-states are a little bit bigger, piracy is a little bit smaller, terrorism is not here. Look at as a human security and a national security problem, but here as an environment problem and national security problem. Climate change are much far from the heart, from the global and the northern perspective. And if you put both with this one, the global approach, if you put both in the same, you will see this map. And as you see here are some big difference. Terrorism is one, resources exploitation is a much different perspective from South Atlantic, from the northern. Marine pollution is seen bigger problem from northern, but not in southern in 2018. And why did I do this research? If you just do the coincidence of the threats, you will see this map. And why I used this research? Well, when you see the real regional problems, it's easy to stakeholders to share information and mainly to allocate resources, human and financial resources, to the really matters to them. And it's a good way to beg the stakeholders to sit on the table and to share what can we do. As you have seen, if climate change is not a problem for the southern countries, it's difficult to call all the countries. Well, what do you think of sit here and put money to change this threat for us? It's not a threat for us. So it's easy if you face the real problems from this perspective. And just for an example, the Northern Sea nowadays, the main problem in South Atlantic is piracy. And I always do with my students some question. When you stamp one region of piracy problem, as we stamp Malacca, as we stamp Somalia, and here in Gulf of Guinea, who wins and who loses? And who wins? The providers of feeling of security. So the defense industry. The major ship owners, where are them? North. Where are the main industry, defense industry? North. The big insurance and P&I clubs, where are them? North. The main companies of private security providers for ships, northern countries. And who loses? Regional states and their maritime traffic, because it will be much more expensive to go there. So we have to think, well, it's a kind of maritime enemy, good to be built to sell something. And in a South Atlantic perspective, we have some initiatives, some of them seen as a good help, but other ones not so much. And I put it here just for example, the NATO strategy for the Gulf of Guinea. The North Atlantic threat strategy for the Gulf of Guinea, something doesn't seem well. The Atlantic Center, recently created by the Portuguese Navy in Azores, calling all the South Atlantic countries to learn with them how to face the maritime security problems. Let me see. Portugal wants to share experience with southern countries. The creation of the 4th and 50th USA Fleet Commands, as you can see in the map, or some kind of difficult things to understand. The maritime domain awareness for trade in Gulf of Guinea is located in Brest, France, and Portsmouth, United Kingdom. Well, a center to help Gulf of Guinea piracy is located in France and United Kingdom. Well, we have to think about this kind of problem. And what can we do here? Well, the proposition to face maritime security in South Atlantic is from bottom to up. We have a lot of coexistences of helping possibilities. From the complex, as I said, we have cooperations, possible cooperations by institutions in one country with the other, from national agreements and cooperation, from multilateral, regional cooperations, and we hope with global cooperation. And what can we see just for an example? We have a lot of interstate agreements being constructed here in South Atlantic. In this picture, I can show you a lot of systems of sharing informations of fishing, oil activities, maritime traffic, all of these systems are now being shared with a lot of countries. Not all of the countries are inside, but a lot of them are adding these agreements. And we have the growth of some investments, mainly in surveillance and control systems, as the big one, the CISGAS, the system to Amazônia Azul, that will integrate a lot of sensor systems to control the mainly area to Brazil, the Amazônia Azul, but for a satellite perspective, you cannot have this kind of line. The satellite looks here, but doesn't look here. No, satellite who looks here, looks here. So we'll have a big picture of what are working in South Atlantic. Another different way, we are near from the first nuclear propulsion submarine in South Atlantic that we can patrol a little bit more far from nowadays, and we have a lot of this kind of new problems as we had here in our northeastern part of Brazil in 2021, a lot of oil that nobody knows where this oil come from. How can we know that? With this kind of system. So we are now looking for some kinds of corporations. And these kinds of cooperation are being built in a lot of multilateral arrangements. As you can see, the Fórum do Mar from the countries from Portuguese languages, from Zopacas, for Camas, from the South Atlantic part. We have problems with some kinds of regional, from the east part of Atlantic, of fishing organization. We have in the west part of South Atlantic, but we are now building a fishing organization, regional fishing organization for the eastern part of South Atlantic. So we are now constructing this kind of approaches and regional approaches, and we have to look for other perspectives to the question. And I think this is a different way to build a common agenda for the South Atlantic perspectives. Well, this was my presentation. I think it was a little bit longer than I could, but just a little. And I'm here to ask if I know and to debate with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Beirão. Timing was perfect. So we are very thankful for the Brazilian perspective being brought to the discussion. And so as we proceed to the debate, I introduce our commentator, Professor Dr. Kentaro Nishimoto from Tohoku University, the Arctic Environment Research Center, and the National Institute of Polar Research in Japan. He has received his PhD in law from the University of Tokyo, and his current research focuses on the international law of the sea, its history, and the settlement of maritime disputes. Dr. Nishimoto has many publications on the field and has also advised the Japanese government on related matters. Thank you once again for joining us, Professor, and please feel free to add your comments to our event.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And first of all, I should thank Professor Beirão for the excellent presentation on the different maritime security issues that exist in the South Atlantic region. And I think the presentation really reminded us about the multifaceted nature of maritime security and the fact that it is a very broad, and I think you used the word diverse concept, covering various issues that are related to issues like national security, human security, the environment, and the economic uses of the sea. And if some of the people in the audience were able to join us for the webinar last week, where I discussed maritime security issues in the East Asia region, I think you would find that the discussion is very different. And so last week, I talked mainly about interstate tensions stemming mainly from the lack of agreed maritime boundaries and maritime claims that are inconsistent with the law of the sea. But in today's discussion, of course, interstate conflict, we saw that as features as one of the elements, but I think this was identified as among the different elements which must be addressed. And I think that element was a little bit far from the center in the slide that we saw. And so I found the stakeholder survey very, very interesting as an effort to identify the maritime security threats as perceived by the actual stakeholders in the region. And I agree very much that we do have to look for others' perspective of the questions, as you indicated in your conclusion. And in that regard, I think finding areas of common interests is very important, especially when you're looking for ways to cooperate in responding to maritime security issues. And also, in addition, although the objective of the research may be somewhat different, maybe a similar research across different regions might be interesting for another purpose in terms of understanding how maritime security is perceived in different regional areas. So I think that is something that might be considered. And so trying not to talk too much in terms of comments, I have 3 questions based on your presentation. The first is a very simple question about the overall situation of the South Atlantic. And it was very interesting to learn for me that there are various frameworks for cooperation in the region. And it was especially interesting for me because I am not really familiar with the region to learn that there are regimes encompassing both states on the South American side and also on the West American side of the South Atlantic Ocean. But I imagine that the situation may be quite different on both sides of the South Atlantic. So I would like to ask if there are any differences in how maritime security issues are perceived and whether any differences can be a challenge for furthering international cooperation. My second question is about the different actors at the domestic level that may be involved in different maritime security issues. And I think you discussed this a little bit in the beginning of your presentation. And I think this is inherent in the multifaceted nature of maritime security. I find it often the case that there is a challenge in responding to some issues that cut across the competencies of multiple domestic authorities in a consistent, coordinated way. And I think in some cases, even if we are talking about international cooperation, this may be in the form of cooperation between the relevant ministries, such as maybe defense ministries or port authorities, and there may not be enough awareness of what each others are doing in terms of international cooperation, even when the work is quite interconnected with each other. And in Japan, this kind of issue was identified as a problem at the national level. And in 2007, a law called the Basic Act on Ocean Policy was enacted, and the headquarters for ocean policy was established so that Japan could have a coordinated ocean policy and that there could be better coordination between the authorities involved. So I was wondering whether there are such similar issues in Brazil or maybe challenges in that regard in the broader region, given that the issues associated with maritime security is very diverse, as you mentioned in your presentation. And the third question is a rather broad question, but it is about lessons for other regions. So in our discussion last week, someone in the audience asked what may be the lessons learned from the situation in the East and South China Seas in East Asia for the other regions. And my response to that was a rather pessimistic one, saying that perhaps due to the unique and difficult situation that we have in East Asia, maybe a better way to look at this question is to look at other regions and ask whether there are any good practices that may help the situation. So perhaps maybe just to continue the discussion from last week in this regard, I was wondering if you can identify any lessons learned from cooperation on maritime security issues in the region that may be of relevance for the other regions. So those are my three questions. So thank you very much for the presentation. And I look forward to the further discussions.
Thank you so much, Professor Nishimoto. Very interesting comments and questions to be discussed. And let me see if I can answer you. Well, the first of one, if I identify some different perspective from South American perspective and Africa coast perspective. Yes, when I have shown the big table with the answers of the stakeholders, I put the name of the countries A, B, C, D, not each name of the countries, and when I have done the interview with the stakeholders, I told to them, I will not say which country said each thing, but I have the real data and not identifying each one of them. Yes, I can ask you, we have a different perspective from South America and from Africa. Mainly in three perspectives. First of one, exploitation of resources. In South America, we have some countries thinking the main problem here is living resources. So fishing, they are worried about illegal and unreported fishing, and other ones in South America in exploitation of oil and gas. And when you see African coast, well, so exploitation of resources is the main threat to South American perspective. From African coast, they have other perspectives. They don't see piracy as the big one. The main problem there are difficult to be identified because some stakeholders tell the problem is smuggling of oil, and other stakeholders is robbery of oil. It's almost the same thing, but they put in a different perspectives. But just 2 or 3 countries say that piracy is a problem. The main perspective of Gulf of Guinea country, the problem is we cannot control our oil exploitation and exportation of oil. So the problem is more financial than a gun problem. And for the second question, if I see and what are the lessons I have learned about the domestic competences and the differences from these perspectives in interstate, as I've shown in the conversion approach of maritime security. Yes, when you have a well-consolidated, institutional consolidated country, it's easy to understand that a top decision will go down in the same way because you have a good institutional formation. But this is not the real situation of mainly all countries in South Atlantic. You have some of them with a good institutional formation. Brazil is one of them, but just for example, a lot of African countries, they don't have navies, or they have recent navies. And why? Because the main problem to those countries 12, 15, 20 years ago are consolidating the land territory. So they have the armies going to the sea nowadays, and they don't know very well the sea problems. They didn't go to naval schools, to naval academies. They are from army facing now sea problems. And you have a lot of problems with some countries with coast guards, another ones with army in the sea, other ones with navies. A lot of them, unfortunately, mainly institutional constructed by the old owners of the countries, from the European owners, constructing the institutions nowadays. So the independence are not well consolidated in a lot of African countries. So when you want to share information, in a lot of situations, you see, if you call a Coast Guard, you will have one approach. If you call the Navy, you will have to be the opposite approach. And each one of them will not share inside the country, the information they receive from me. And from international perspective, mainly from the northern perspective, a lot of these small institutions inside the countries want to receive the money from international, from northern help. And this kind of helps in a lot of situations, instead of growing maritime security, grow the divergence, the internal divergence of institutions, because they help one institution and the other one doesn't receive anything, doesn't know anything. So we will have problems inside countries that we didn't have before. And the third question, lessons learned about cooperation in South Atlantic. I will answer you with a particular, very particular perspective. I didn't believe in Zopakas. And always when I went some conferences to talk about the Zopakas, the cooperation zone, peaceful cooperation zone in South Atlantic, I always said, and who is the head of Zopacas? Where is the building of Zopacas? What is the regiment of Zopacas? What are the institutions and the internal organs of Zopacas? And the answer is no leader, no build, no structure, no regulation. So I always said Zopacas is almost nothing. It's just an intention in South Atlantic. And I said it a lot of times. But once in Netherlands, one Brazilian ambassador in Netherlands came to me, asked me to lunch with him. And he said to me, well, I understood your perspective from cooperation, but you have two different ways of increasing a cooperation. The first one is up to down. You build an institution, you put money, you write a reglement, a lot of organs and a lot of positions to be paid for a lot of countries. And after that, you begin to work. This is the way as UN or OEA, Euro-American countries, or even UNASUL was tried in South America. But when the owner doesn't want to put money to pay all of this, the building, the structure, the positions, the decisions, the meetings, it runs. And the other way to build a cooperation is from a bottom to up. You begin creating mutual believing, some bilateral believings and cooperations. And when you have a lot of these cooperations crosses, naturally, they say, well, we have to structure this. So it begins from bottom to up. And from this perspective, I understood the Zopacas. It was built in the second perspective, from bilateral cooperations, from one subject, from one problem. And nowadays, as I tried to show in the map with a lot of sharing information, I believe much more in Zopacas than I believed 2 or 3 years ago. I think this cooperation are increasing a lot in South Atlantic. But linking this third question with the first one, what are our overall main problem? We feel different perspectives from South America and Africa. From South America, the main perspective is we have to face the problems with regional perspective and resources. And from Africa perspective, we don't have resources. So if northern countries want to put money here, I will accept their help. This is the overall perspective of different perspectives from South America that wants to build a sharing cooperation to face the problem, from Africa that wants to receive mainly resources from the north to resolve the problem. That's it. I hope I have answered your questions. Yeah. Well, Luana, Luana, are you hearing us? Yes. Do you have some audience questions? If I know how to answer them. Yes,
of course. I think I had some connection issues, or one of us did. Thank you very much to both professors. And once again, we have received very interesting questions from the audience. So I have merged two of them to begin. I'm gonna send it in our chat. Could Brazil become a relevant actor in the security of the South Atlantic in a short period? And also, how do you see the future panorama of maritime security concerning Antarctica from the Brazilian perspective, considering climate change and future resources? A complex one.
Yes, because we have a lot of small questions in the big one. Well, let me try. Well, could Brazil become a relevant actor? As I travel a little bit with a lot of countries, I think northern countries want Brazil as a relevant actor more than Brazil wants to be a relevant actor. From them, it would be very useful if one of the regional countries say, okay, I will lead it to face this problem, leave it to me, I will resolve it. They want this relevance of Brazil. But I don't feel really this interesting in Brazil, because it costs a lot. It's not cheap to lead this kind of actions. We have to put a lot of money in defense resources, navies, of teaching procedures, sharing systems and information systems. So it's so expensive. I don't see this as the main interest of Brazil. The second part of the question, the panorama of maritime security concerning Antarctica. Well, Antarctica is a big problem to be faced in about 40 years. In about 40 years, we will have these big problems. And for us, as international law professors, it's a very interesting subject that can be discussed from a law perspective very well, because nowadays we have some kind of peace agreement of all the world to Antarctica, but all the world are building some kinds of guns. Well, let us see when the Antarctica Treaty ends what we will have to put in place. If we don't have a new treaty or renew the actual treaty, we will have a big problem. And in South Atlantic part of Antarctica is the big one of problem, because it's the hottest part of Antarctica, the peninsula of Charles, our Charles Peninsula is the hottest part. A lot of scientific stations are, all of them nearby one of the other in this peninsula. So if we don't renew the Antarctica treaty, we will have a big problem. But not now. Now we are in a peaceful use for scientific researchers in Antarctica. And the third part, climate change and future resources. Sincerely, as I have shown, climate change is not a problem from South. They have bigger problems to think than climate change in the sea. We know, we that discuss a lot of sea, it will be a big problem, but is not seen from countries, from African countries, and even from South American countries as the big problem. No, climate change, no. Resources, yes. Exploitation of the zone resources, the marine resources, the fishing resources. South Atlantic, mainly in Africa coast, is a very good place for fishing. From American coast, South Atlantic is not so good, but in the south, in the cold waters nearby the Malvinas and Argentina, we have a lot of fish in a complicated area with Falklands and all the geopolitical problem facing there. Okay, I try to answer all the parts of the question.
Perfect, Professor. Thank you very much. And to close up, I have merged another two questions, being them, how does the current power transition in the international system affect maritime security or vice versa? And are there opportunities for cooperation between Japan and Brazil regarding maritime security?
Well, the second part of the question I understood very well. Yes, we can cooperate a lot because from very different beginnings, Japan, not so big in Navy powers because of the Second War, the constitutional decision, and Brazil, not so big Navy war, not from this beginning, but the other one, not a lot of money and technology. But both don't have big navies. But one of them, Brazil, has a big experience in big areas. And Japan has a lot of technology. So the cooperation of both countries in systems, technology, sharing procedures are very useful for maritime security increases in both areas. But the first part of the question, how does the current power transition affect maritime security? I didn't understand very well which kind of international system power transition is in this question. But if the interesting is about from USA to China, if I don't know if is this perspective from the question. I think we have two big differences. But at the end, there is no difference. Why? Because from United States perspective, they say they follow the UNCLOS, but they didn't sign the UNCLOS. So if their interests are different, they have the perfect excuse to say, well, I didn't sign, I don't have to follow. And from the other perspective, from China, they signed the UNCLOS, they say, I follow the UNCLOS, but if their interests are not as UNCLOS says, she says, well, that was in that time. Nowadays, I think different, and I have power for that, to think in a different perspective. So from both, at the end, you have the same result. So if their interests are against what are agreed about the world, they will decide as their intentions. It was in this way from United States perspective, and for China, we are facing a lot of small demonstrations of this. Well, I don't understand like that, the UNCLOS. So I will not, I don't think it will be a big changing, just the changing of the main actor.
Thank you so much, Professor. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. It was a pleasure hosting this event, and I thank again the professors for the participation in this double discussions. I also thank the Japan House São Paulo for supporting the initiative and everyone who is watching us now. To those in Brazil, a great night, and to Professor Nishimoto, have a lovely day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you, Professor.